She was born February 29th, 1916. First of all, even though she lived 105 years, she only had, I think it was 26 real birthdays. This was just fine with her because on off years, she would choose either the 28th or the 1st. If you think about the date, 1916, she lived through 2 pandemics, 2 world wars, a depression, countless downturns in the economy, the rise of radio, invention of TV, the internet, and on and on. When she was born, horses were beginning to replace cars, which means our roads were still mud. We were told a story about the advent of electricity. Mom's father, our grandfather, George Garrison, who lived with oil lamps and candles, had an argument with the company that had put in the electricity. He told them, just take it out. I don't need it anymore. You can imagine how that went over with his girls. Mom was one of 6 girls of George and Mary Garson. They lived on Delaware in Chatham on a long, narrow lot that had a fish pond made from a water heater cut in half. Granddad was a plumber, and they had a plumbing store in Chatham. The garden had fruit trees and a chicken coop that in later years was used to dry tobacco. I still remember the garden and feeding the goldfish oatmeal. There was a rope swing, and as Mom and her sister Arlene described, 2 tennis courts end on end. The young folks from their church used to play on the courts, and our dad was one of them. Mom and Dad married and moved to Windsor, where Dad worked for Ford's. They lived in a small wartime house and eventually moved to a larger one on Bing Road. We could walk to our local school, one of those ones that has a sign on one side for boys and the other side for girls. Mom organized a marionette troupe, making the puppets and putting on shows for children. Dad made a stage for the marionettes that served as a storage box for everything. I think we all still know how to make a puppet head by sculpting with plasticine and covering it with paper mache. Dad's happy place was Rondo Park, where his family had a cottage, and he visited the park for his whole life. Dad eventually built a cottage there himself on the Lake Erie side of the park. Mom would pack us up for the weekend and holidays. I still remember the feel of cool sand through my toes and the sound of waves coming onto shore. The park used to have amusement activities, and before our time there were dance halls where I assumed they played Guy Lombardo-type music. As the park was in the process of removing its cottages, Mom and Dad bought a lease that had 4 years left on the Rondo Bay side, just near the gates. As they put it, it was cheaper than rent. Then the cottage did not get removed, and that's a whole nother story. Dad got moved to Ford's in Oakville, which is where I finished high school. Mom never gave us a curfew because she didn't want us to get in an accident rushing home. I don't think we ever took advantage of that, although I'm not sure about Peter because I was away at school. Mom served on the school board in Oakville for a few years and enjoyed living there very much. She had a small office where she wrote stories and poetry. She even found a how-to book on binding so she could make a copy of her poetry for her boys. At the end of this, I'll put a link where you can read more of her poetry if you wish. Then Ford's again moved us this time to Dearborn, Michigan. At that point, it was time for me to go to university in Hamilton, but everyone else went to the U.S. Mom and Dad decided to move back to Windsor, close to where they lived before, and Dad commuted until he retired. Mom owned and operated a hobby ceramic store called Potteramics in Windsor. Dad died in 1989, and eventually Mom moved into a condo in Windsor. She used her computer to edit and produce a newsletter for Business Women's Association, and she joined Friends of Willestead Library and taught painting there. In her 80s, she would help the older students in their 60s and 70s in with their painting equipment. She joined a needlework group and won awards for her creations. She learned tatting from one of her aunts and created many pieces from the tiny knots as she watched TV. At the age of 88, we took Mom to Europe, where she saw Venice, Florence, Zurich, and London. In Venice, we told her that we were going to take the bus, and she said, "You can't fool me, it's a boat." The Italians were very kind to her, and because we were with her, they were kind to us too. She played accompaniment for a choir at the seniors' home in Windsor, and that is where she met Russell Grant, who was a retired musician conducting the choir. They lived together for about 20 years until he died in 2017. In short, this was a long, happy, and eventful life that was well lived. We will miss her very much. She was always interested in our lives and our children, but always careful to let us live them. We will always remember her for this.